Today being the day before Valentine's Day, and a day they were celebrating a marriage, I thought it only fitting to take a look at husbands and wives and the idea of the marriage relationship and what it says to us about Jesus. Because ultimately, everything in our lives is about Jesus. And ultimately, every ceremony that we participate in, every ritual that we have in our lives should reflect our relationship with Jesus. So, Joseph Parker, a Congregationalist preacher who lived from 1830 to 1902, asked this question. And I'm going to start off with addressing the husbands, or husbands in the relationship. Whoever knew of a head of a house that was not more or less in gloom? This same head of the house all the world over. Whoever knew of a head of the house who was more or less low-spirited, worried by 100 anxieties, tormented by a sudden fear? Perhaps naturally so. After all, he is the head of the house and probably the lightning conductor, being higher than any other part of the building, may have experience of the thunderstorms and lightning discharges that lower parts of the structure know nothing about. Ladies, let me say that many is the man, the husband, who feels this weight. Society does not grant him the title head of house with any dignity anymore. In fact, I think it's been a long time that our society has not looked at the husband in a mocking way. And I've often complained that if you look at television and music and the old-time radio programs that Lena and I like to listen to, that the husband has been portrayed as a fool who needs his wife and children to help him, keep from spilling soup on his shirt. And yet, he should be given some measure of dignity. I think it's a rare instance that it happens, but it's not something that's much considered in our culture anymore. In fact, let a man speak of himself in this way as head of the house, and he will probably be criticized for it. All right? Sadly, that if a man says that he thinks of himself as the head of the house, that he's being misogynistic, that he doesn't like women, or that he's a male chauvinist who just wants to lord it over his family. And nevertheless, it is how he sees himself, whether he expresses it or not. It's the image of his position in the marriage. Not out of lording it over anyone, not out of a sense of bossing the gang, but it's his responsibility, laid on him, especially if he considers himself to be a Christian, by God. He didn't ask for it, and too many men today abdicate that position. One of the greatest crimes and faults and failures of our society is the single-parent home, with the mom trying to raise children that a man helped father, helped create, but then abandoned. And I would argue that part of the reason that so many men have abandoned that responsibility is they've taken the attitude, well, if you're not going to let me have it to begin with, why should I seek it? I don't blame women in general. I'm not saying that women are all at fault in this. I'm saying that as a society, as a culture, we have so devalued the position of husband and father and the man in the house that men are asking themselves, and have asked themselves for a long time, what's the point? If I'm just going to be criticized for it, if I'm just going to be insulted for it, then I'm not going to seek it. And it has led to too many children being left out in the cold in one way or another. It has led to too many children without the male influence in their lives that creates a balance in their emotional well-being. You realize that the number of men in prison who were from single-parent homes, from being raised by just their mothers, is somewhere in the area of 80%. That's tragic. And it shouldn't be. And it's not the fault of the mother, right? You're asking this woman to do a job all on her own that none of us were designed to do, that she wasn't equipped to do. And I don't say that to downgrade women. But raising children is a balancing act. And it needs the input of both sides. Men of God understand that they bear a weight of responsibility for the well-being of their family, and it can be a heavy weight. I can say that I've had many sleepless nights, especially when we were younger and had young children at home, and I was making very little money. And we were struggling to put food on the table or gas in the gas tank, and there were many nights that I had a hard time going to sleep or sleeping well because I didn't know where the next meal was coming from or where the next tank of gas to get me to work was going to come from. Or just the idea that I couldn't provide things for my family that weren't even luxuries, were just basic necessities. My daughter Hannah one time was walking across the floor. She was about, 5 or 6 years old. And as she's walking across the floor, she's walking in a very odd manner. I can't even describe it. It's just a very odd way of walking. And I asked her, "Why are you walking like that? What's going on?" And she said, "My shoes are too tight." And so, well, come over here. And I felt her shoes. I couldn't believe she got her feet into them. And I said, "Why didn't you tell me that your shoes were too tight?" She said, "Because we can't afford shoes." The first thing I did was bawl. And the second thing I did was take my kids out and buy them new shoes. We hadn't been able to up to that point. But we were finally, at that time, getting into a position where we could. And it wouldn't have mattered if I couldn't have afforded it anyway. I would have gone without food the rest of that week to make sure that my kids had shoes that fit. It was tragic that a 6-year-old had to point it out to me. But I couldn't have changed the circumstances much at that time. Those kind of things create sleepless nights for husbands. Those kind of things, not being able to provide, that is a basic drive in men. To be able to provide, to be able to do. Men, there are things that we should not be as we bear that weight. We should not be overly strong or stern or overbearing. Again, quoting Parker, "Woe to the man who thinks he combines all populations and personalities in himself." You know, the guy that thinks that he knows it all. He has all the answers, and he arrogantly makes sure that everybody knows it, especially his wife. The Apostle Peter put it this way, "You husbands likewise live with your wives in an understanding way, as with a weaker vessel, since she is a woman, and granting her honor as a fellow heir of the grace of life, so that your prayers may not be hindered." You find that in 1 Peter 3:7. I want to point out a couple of things here about this. First, it does not exactly say that the wife is the weaker vessel, but that men should treat their wives as if they are. Not in a negative way, because the rest of the verse makes it abundantly clear. Right? Grant her honor as a fellow heir of the grace of life. but understanding that she is physically, structurally weaker than you are. That's a concept we seem to have a hard time grasping in our culture these days, right? That there's a difference between men and women. Who'd have thought? That structurally, physically, there's a difference. It doesn't mean that one's less valuable than the other. It doesn't mean that one is more valuable than the other. They are different, not the same. If you have a hard time with that, go back to your Sesame Street shows, right? One of these things is not like the other, right? It's that simple, right? What Peter's saying is, don't manhandle her, guys. Don't think that she's physically, structurally as strong, as physical as you are. And treat her well and with respect. I look at it this way, going back to when I got married, I thought it was interesting. One of the things I heard was that most fathers look at the idea of their daughters getting married like this. He is putting a Stradivarius in the hands of a gorilla. Right? And that's how we husbands should look at our wives. As a Stradivarius. I don't know. Some of you might be bassoons. Do you hear your wife's suggestions or ideas with an air of contempt, as if she did not know what she's talking about? Do you, as Parker suggests, then go out and work out her idea and get the profit of it and say what a clever man you are? Take heed of his warning. That is not honest. It is not just. As the Bible says, thou shalt not steal. Don't steal your wife's ideas, guys. Don't steal her wisdom and her intelligence and claim it as your own. But cherish it for what it is. That God gave you a part of your brain that you were missing. And if we're honest with ourselves, we all understand that there's a part of our brain that must be missing. It is a wise man that listens to his wife, and it's a wiser man that gives credit where credit is due. So, who should we be, men? It's easily summed up in a few verses. Colossians 3:19 tells us, husbands, love your wives and do not be harsh with them. Ephesians 5:28, in the same way, husbands ought to love their wives as they love their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. You know why Christ said that it was better for a man not to be married if he was able in order to serve the kingdom of God? Because it was understood that a married man owed a duty of care to his wife that was sacred before God. Marriage is sacred before God. If you get married, you owe a duty of care to your wives that God says has to come in its proper place. And he will hold us accountable, men, if we don't. I'll stop beating up on the guys. Now I can start beating up on the wives. Kidding. Proverbs tells men that he who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from the Lord. I note, without having done a detailed search on this, that the scriptures offer no such consolation to the women. Right? Think about that. The man finds a wife, he finds a good thing, but the Bible never really says that if a woman finds a husband, she finds a good thing. I'll just let you ponder that. So take it for what it's worth, but we should ask, what kind of a wife is a good thing? So we see the story of Manoah's wife. This is the mother of Samson. We find her in Judges chapter 13. Manoah, his father, and his mother, who remains unnamed but not unremembered, The angel of the Lord came and spoke to them and told them of the birth of Samson. And Manoah's reaction was fear. The husband's reaction was to be afraid. We shall surely die, for we have seen God. But his wife was, as is often the case, more thoughtful and more insightful than he was. She said, if the Lord had desired to kill us, he would not have accepted a burnt offering and a grain offering from our hands, nor would he have shown us all these things, nor would he have let us hear things like this at this time. She saw what her husband saw, but she saw more clearly. She did not condemn him for his fear. She merely pointed out that his fear was unfounded, and so she gave him comfort. A man who finds a good wife who can bring him comfort in times of stress and distress finds a good thing. Unfortunately, you could have a wife like Job's wife. Pity the man who is married to a woman like Job's wife. Ladies, I know that men are not known for suffering in silence. And although we should remember, though, a medical study from Harvard University did show that men's colds actually are worse. So I have scientific data to prove that when we say our colds are worse, Harvard said yes. But Job's wife could have used some lessons in compassion. Granted, she too is suffering the loss of her children and all of their wealth. Right? I mean, face it, when Job lost everything, his wife lost everything too. And that's often overlooked. But she faced the same circumstances, the same torment, the same problems that Job was facing, but her reaction was very different. Where Job said, the Lord gives, the Lord takes away, blessed be the name of the Lord. But as Job suffered, and apparently not so much in silence, her reaction was to tell Job to look at him and say, just curse God and die. Right? And I don't get the sense that it was in the sense that she was looking for a way out of his torment, but that she was fed up with hearing him bellyache. Clearly she'd had enough. And if only they could have stuck together in the midst of their pain, what a difference it would have made in their lives. But passing over Job's wife, we have Nabal's wife, Abigail. If Manoah could offer consolation and Job's wife only condemnation, Nabal's wife was the picture of consideration. Finally, it's the wife who looks after her husband even when he is careless of his own well-being. In 1 Samuel 25, we find the story of when David was on the run from Saul and he went looking for supplies. He went looking for food to feed his men. And he came to Nabal's house, or actually one of David's servants went to Nabal's house looking for provisions. And instead of offering hospitality, Nabal, which by the way means foolish in Hebrew, Nabal refused to help. In fact, his response was basically, who is David to me? And David was ready to shorten him up by about the height of his head. And was all set to go out when Abigail intervened. Now, whatever her motive was for intervening, be it love or self-preservation, she interceded for her husband and showed herself to be an honorable woman. She preserved her husband's life from the sword, even though he little deserved it. Read the story again in 1 Samuel 25 sometime. He's not the picture of the husband I'm talking about that we want to be. And he later paid for his actions, sadly dying without realizing what a treasure he had in his wife. Because she took supplies to David. She went and brought things to him and his men, right? Because hospitality was important in that culture, and because she didn't want her husband shortened up. Finally, tomorrow is the holiday that celebrates, inaccurately, I believe, romantic love. And there's nothing wrong with romantic love, okay? In spite of what my wife might think. See, I'm the romantic in our family. I'm the one that remembers anniversaries and birthdays. I'm the one that's okay with candlelight dinners and things like that. My wife is the one that says, turn on the lights, I can't see what I'm eating. And nevertheless, she shows me love in many, many other ways that are much more important. But romantic love is so little of the relationship in which we enter in marriage. It's like the icing on the cake or the a la mode on the pie. But the reality is that Genesis 2:24 says, and Jesus repeats himself, therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. Men are to bear the responsibility for the well-being of their home and their family. Women care for the well-being of the home and family as well in a different way. We bear one another's burdens. We support and strengthen each other. And we commit to each other. And I would ask this, if God will never leave us or forsake us, no matter how many times we mess up, and if marriage represents the relationship between the believer and God, how then could we in a marriage relationship ever leave one another? I know that's not the reality for a lot of people. I know that divorce is an unfortunate reality in our culture for a plenitude of reasons. It's just not what God designed. It's not what he desired. And it's not the way it works best. I would argue for many people, not everybody, but I would argue for many, that the fault in so many marriages is that we are in a hurry to find that love, and we don't take the time to find the right one. We don't take the time to make sure that the foundation is stable. We don't take the time to make sure that this is God's will and that it's right for both people. And do you realize that we can do more disservice to the other person by entering in too quickly than we ever could by not getting married at all? So, as is often the case with preachers and pastors, right? I understand that this is not the way it is for everybody. But we don't teach right? I don't teach that this is the way it's going to be for everybody. We teach the ideal and hope that we can live up to the ideal. We teach what Christ wants, knowing full well that we are human beings and flawed and not likely to live up to it all the time. But our desire should be to live up to it, to strive for it, to seek it. Because our marriage is a picture of our relationship with Christ, and we don't ever want to be divorced from our bridegroom. Perhaps our wedding vows should go something like this. I will be as Christ to you. Will you be as the church to me? Let's pray.